in defence of the Galaxy Fold. So firstly, I don't have a Galaxy Fold. I wish I was in some way connected in a way that I'd be able to get a gadget of that nature straight off the bat, but I'm not. So I guess the reason that I'm kind of like making this video is that I'm super into technology, as you may have guessed from my other videos, but I also am a bit of a realist. I'm also quite often an early adopter of technology, and with that comes a kind of like expectation that maybe you're gonna struggle a little bit, not struggle, maybe you're not going to achieve the level of quality with a first generation product that you might want. Take for example the PlayStation Portable that I've got literally over there that I can see now. You know, it was banging, it was a great piece of hardware, but at the same time it was improvable, and the next generation PSP was better. But I mean, that's just something I can see in front of me. If we cast our mind back and think about some other things which have improved massively over the time, things like aeroplanes. I mean, you know, if we take aside the Boeing 787 Max or whichever one it is, and we just look at planes as a whole, the first generation one, the Wright Flyer from the Wright brothers back in the day, 1902 I think, in fact, on its first go managed to achieve 3.5 seconds of flight, and then landed accidentally and broke it. So, you know, many generations of plane have gone since, or come since, and nowadays we can get on a plane and fly to Australia or somewhere else far away. So, you know, that was a pretty rubbish first generation product. Same with, for example, a Model T Ford, first mass-produced car that most people could afford. Well, a lot of people could afford. Most is probably pushing it somewhat. I mean, if you compare that to modern standards, after many years of iteration, it was a piece of junk. You know, it wasn't very fast, wasn't very fuel efficient, really unsafe, looked boxy and was rubbish, probably didn't handle very well, all that kind of thing. I mean, if you're struggling to kind of like make that analogy between a folding mobile phone and a car or a plane from back in the day, maybe think about like the iPhone 2G or the first generation iPhone. It was garbage by modern standards. I mean, it couldn't send MMS messages, so no picture messages. People forget these kind of things about the first iPhone. It didn't have copy and paste. I mean, can you imagine a phone coming out today and not having copy and paste? Not only that, it had rubbish camera, even by phones of similar price points at the time. I remember when the iPhone 2G came out, I had a Nokia N95 which had a much better camera, and then there was other things. It didn't have an app store, so you had like the apps that were on it, like YouTube I think was basically it, and like the standard Apple apps, and that was that. If something came out these days which was as bad as the iPhone 2G, then you'd never have got, if everyone went, nope, stop, this is never going to work, stop doing mobile phones like this, then we would never have got to the phones that basically everyone has now. I think the point that I'm trying to make is that the Galaxy Fold is a first gen product. I mean, if we look at those things I just talked about, the plane, the car and the old iPhone, compared to what came before them in that sort of context, they were amazing. I mean, if you look at you know, the fact that prior to the Wright Flyer, people couldn't fly. The achievement of being able to do it for 3.5 seconds, and then a couple of days later, be able to do it for, you know, 860 feet, I think was the longest one that they achieved with that. That's incredible. From nothing to that is amazing. But if you go from that to where we are now, it's garbage. You know, an Airbus A380 compared to the Wright Flyer, a whole different pack of cards. Same with the car. You know, if you consider what cars were available for the Model T Ford and how they were made and all that sort of stuff and the cost that they had, and then you compare it backwards, or to what was available prior to it was amazing. It's only when you compare it to what's come since it, where it was the trendsetter, that you can kind of say, oh, it's no good. And much the same with the iPhone 2G. You know, I appreciate that the Galaxy is not an iPhone. I use a lot of iPhones, and I think it would be reasonable to say that prior to the iPhone, mobile phones were not heading in the same direction that they are now. Or maybe they were, but to a less. I mean, do you remember when mobile phones had resistive screens? So you actually had to like squidge them. Like think about were they XDAs and stuff, which were like Windows Mobile resistive screens. You know, you were pushing them and you could feel the screen bending. That's how they worked. And that was if you were like at the top end. I mean, my Nokia N95, for example. Do you remember the old slidey uppy thing? Just going in a different route. And then the iPhone came out, and whilst by modern standards the iPhone 2G is rubbish, compared to what came beforehand, it was like a spacecraft. I remember a guy in my office had one. You know, I had my N95. I was like, oh, iPhones are rubbish, blah, blah, blah. You can't even copy and paste or whatever the thing was. I think it was MMS was the main thing we used to like rib him about, and also the quality of the camera. The reality is that even then you could tell, like, this is, like, when you held it in your hand, it's like, this is a better thing than what I have currently. And it set the bar. And from then, it's just taken off and gone crazy. I mean, I've got the iPhone 10 myself. It's miles better than the iPhone 2G. At the same time, the iPhone 2G was better. It set a new line in the sand. And I think, you know, the reason I chose the iPhone is because I'm pretty, you know, I think even your most ardent Android fanboy would have to agree that probably drew a line in the sand, that's where things have to go from now. Nothing can come out now and be a premium phone which is worse than this, and that means Android and everything else. So when you looked at the, I forget the name of it, the original like Google phone that slid up and all that sort of stuff. I think it's made by HTC, right? Anyway, they all like had to at least compete with it. So what I'm saying is, if you think about this sort of thing, someone has to go first, and then everyone learns from that. And I mean, I realise that there's some like obscure manufacturers making folding screen phones and devices and stuff like that. But let's face it, Samsung is first out to any number of people that we know about. And then you've got, is it Xiaomi is making the other one? It'll be interesting. Is it Xiaomi or Hawaii? Hawaii? You know who I mean. Anyway, one of them's got a folding screen that comes the other way around, which, to be fair to me, I like the look of better, just because I think the screen, like, I don't understand having that little screen in the front, but you know, whatever. Someone has to do something first. Someone has to break the mold. Someone has to take the punches, so to speak, that we're seeing Samsung having to take at this point. But on the other hand, someone takes the punches in terms of paying the money and taking the hits in terms of maybe the user experience is not quite where we're at. Like, I mean, it seems better than I would have imagined from the videos that I've seen, but certainly as someone who is like an early adopter when I can afford to be, you kind of, you know, you're going to have to take some of these little bits because everyone's learning. Like, the manufacturers are learning, the developers are learning, and all this sort of stuff. It's much the same as when the Wright brothers are flying their plane around. They probably weren't sitting there thinking, oh, the meal on this plane is terrible, because everyone was learning. Like, it wasn't even a thing at that point. It was more just, hopefully I'm not going to die, like lots of other people trying to learn how to fly were doing. So my point being is that if no one ever goes first, if no one ever makes the first generation of a product, there's never a second gen, there's never a third gen, and so on and so forth. So things never get better. Things never get to the point where it's like, well, obviously every phone is a folding phone. Why wouldn't it be? Because that's just standard. I mean, I can't help but feel that it's a bit naive to think that you're going to buy a first generation Galaxy Fold and it's going to be equal in quality and user experience to like a 10th generation Galaxy non-fold. It just doesn't seem realistic to me. I mean, the fact that we have that expectation is kind of impressive. It shows you where technology is these days, but at the same time, it's not really realistic. I mean, let's face it, along those lines, there have been problems. Let's all remember the exploding, was it the S7 I think exploded, the batteries, and that was a 7th generation thing. So the very fact that the first generation is having a few problems, and I would argue that the guy from The Verge's one, which had something stuck on the screen, it kind of actually had a screen damage, but people pulling the front of the screen, I mean, that's not managing user expectation and how they interact with the device properly. It was something which is relatively easy for them to resolve just by putting a big sticker on there or something. So, I mean, until there is a lot more of these out there, it's going to be hard to kind of quantify exactly what the problems are, how bad they are. The one where it had something stuck under the screen and broke the screen, that is more of a worry to me than people peeling off the screen and breaking it. And at the end of the day, people break their normal phones. I mean, how many teenage girls do you tend to see with smashed to pieces phones? Now, I don't know why I tend to see more girls with smashed to pieces phones, but I do. I do see plenty of blokes with smashed to pieces phones as well. I should be clear. Can you imagine if those people were carrying around first generation folds? Then you'd see all kinds of horrific things happening to them. But I suppose that's one of the not the plus sides, but one of the side effects of them being so expensive is that they're going to be priced out of reach of the people who kind of don't appreciate the sort of bleeding edge. They're not aware of that you're going to have to maybe treat it a little bit differently than you might do an absolutely mass-produced, mass-market thing, which is at a price where everyone can have it. That's not to say that people who have bought these shouldn't expect a reasonable quality and a reasonable not return on investment, but a reasonable experience from their device. I think it's just that most people are going to spend $2,000 on a phone that's the first generation and has some kind of crazy new technology built into it, are probably also going to understand that there's going to be give and take with that. So another question that I have is, what are they going to do about this? Now, I would have to assume that being as they've pushed back the release date, etc., but they must have been ready for that release date, which I assume means that they had plenty of these things ready to go. So I guess that the opportunity to re-engineer these things at this point is kind of not there. It's going to be like a temporary not a temporary solution, a super quick something they can do. Now, whether that comes down to putting an instruction leaflet or sticker on there saying don't peel off the screen protectory thing, unless they find like a horrific manufacturing fault in these things, they're not going to be doing some kind of crazy re-engineering of it. And I mean, you've seen the video of them like unfolding and folding these things like loads of times, so I don't think there is going to be like a massive manufacturing issue with these things. That being said, who knows what they're going to do. It'll be interesting to see what they do, but I imagine it's just going to come down to having a sticker on there saying don't pull the front off the screen, and then obviously maybe, who knows, putting something in the way of getting dirt under the screen, if that was what happened with that one. I don't know, but it's going to be something temporary like that, or not temporary, but low impact on the devices, because I assume that these things are all sitting there ready to go at this point. Yeah, I can't imagine that they'll be able to do anything else. What will happen is that Gen 2 will have some changes made, no doubt, to make that less of a problem, but for that we need to wait for Gen 2, and that doesn't come until Gen 1 is out there and breaking and doing whatever it does. So will people still get this phone? I don't think there's going to be any problem with that. I mean, let's face it, with the S7 or whichever one it was that was exploding, there was people wanting to keep them. They had to software update them to stop them from working, so that people had to take them back and get whatever was happening with them. I forget off the top of my head at this point, but certainly people wanted to keep them. You know, people who like gadgets, people who are getting these things because they want it rather than it's just their work phone or whatever like that. They want these things. They're happy to accept the sort of the foibles, or they want it just so they can moan about it, which, let's face it, in this social media day and age, there's plenty of those people too. But I think the reality is that people who are, you know, I wouldn't have thought that there was a mass market appeal for these phones anyway. So these are going to people who either are insanely rich or love new technology, or a little bit of both. And I guess the people who are insanely rich, I'm not one of those people, so I can't really speak to them, but I assume that they'll either take really good care of it, or if it breaks, they'll just throw it away and get whatever else they want. But people are super into the technology, and they're like hunting this down because it's the new thing. They want to have the newest thing, and have $2,000 to spend on one. I think that they're much more likely to take care of it or be able to roll with the punches of this thing a lot more than perhaps someone who's getting it for their work phone. I mean, no one's going to be getting this for their work phone, right? I can't imagine a company that's going to go, yeah, we'll spend twice as much to get a phone just because it has a bigger screen for our employee to sit and like chill out on the train looking at or something. I just don't think that's a thing that's likely to happen. Yeah, I think these are going to be phones that go to people who really want them, who really want new technology, and they're probably still really going to want this technology whether or not it has a few bumps in the road. Am I going to get one? No, I don't think so. I mean, I'm firmly invested into that sheeple life of iPhone users. My first iPhone was a 3GS, so I held out for a little bit. But ever since then, I've been on the iPhone tip. I also think that I probably wouldn't go for it even if I was an Android user. Primarily, I just can't afford to drop that kind of money. I've already got like a tablet, I've got a laptop, and I've got a PC. I don't need like a middle ground there between my tablet and phone. I've got an iPhone 10. I mean, when it gets to the point where these phones are A, cheaper, and B, a few generations in, when every phone is a folding screen phone, I should say, then maybe yes. Like, I have no objection to it. I just can't justify it to myself at the moment. Do I think it's going to be like a big problem to manufacturers or like to Samsung or whoever, like these problems that they're having? No. Do I think everyone's going to get one? I mean, I'm not even convinced. Having seen it, like, it looks cool. Don't get me wrong. I think that if I had unlimited money, I would definitely get one, because why wouldn't you? But I mean, people are going, oh yeah, the screen size is so great, blah blah blah. I don't care. Like, I probably would get it. I've got the iPhone 10. If I was to get a 10s or 11 or whatever the next one's going to be, I'd go for the bigger one. But I don't really want bigger than that. It's not that I don't want it, I just don't value bigger than that at literally nearly twice the price of the phone. But then again, new iPhones are getting up there anyway. When Apple decides to make a folding phone, or folding screen phone I should say, if they ever do, then you know it's going to be like 4th generation technology at that point. I mean, their version will obviously be their first version, and they'll carry on like they invented this thing. But let's face it, they'll have let manufacturers figure this stuff out by then. And developers, you know, that you know it'll work properly, and there'll be loads of apps for it and all that sort of stuff. If at that point I can afford the $4,000 it's going to cost for the Apple version, because let's face it, it's going to be twice as expensive, and I want it, and there's a use case, and everyone's got folding phones, and it's just the thing that everyone's doing now, and there's some kind of like killer app that I haven't foreseen at this point, then obviously I'll be looking to do that. I mean, I don't know if I'll be looking to drop $4,000. I'd love to have the money to drop $4,000 on a phone, but I don't think that's going to happen. At the same time, if I can get a phone for the same price as what every other phone costs, I mean, if every phone is a folding phone, then economies of scale suggest that the price will come down anyway, all that sort of good stuff. So I'm certainly not ruling out getting a folding screen phone. I mean, the animations of that Razer one look pretty amazing to me. Like, amazing to the point of there's no way that thing's ever going to come out and look anything like that. But nonetheless, that did appeal. I have nothing against it. If I could get an iPhone version of it, it cost a reasonable amount and was reliable, then yeah, I'd be up for it. That isn't the reason for me not getting one. The reason for me not getting one is that I'm not an Android user. I don't have $2,000 to spend on a phone, and I haven't seen a use case that really matters to me to the point where I'd spend an insane amount of money on one. Do I think other people will get them? Yes, still absolutely 100% people will get these things. Lots of people are more rich than me, what can I say? I feel like I've rambled on in this video for quite a long time. If you got through to the end, then I'm both sorry and appreciative of you. If you want to see any of the other technology videos and stuff that I make, then subscribe, put the bell on, catch you in the next one, I guess.